Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here, and it is game 2 for Michael Penix, the rookie quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, coming in relief of Kirk Cousins. And the first game was not much of a test, Logan. He got the New York Giants, who are not playing good football, to be very, very kind about it. Now he's Sunday Night Football on the road, potentially in the rain, against a Commanders defense that really locked it down for the final 3 quarters against Philadelphia. And it's funny, I got a stat for you that really proves why the Falcons went to Michael Penix. Kirk, obviously the interceptions and things just not going well, but their offense has the ability to be so much more dynamic with him. Penix was used in a design rollout on 24.1% of his dropbacks last week, his first start. That is the 8th highest by a qualified passer in a game this season. Kirk's rollout rate in weeks 1 through 15 when he was the starter, 2.3%, Logan. 2.3%. So, yeah, they wanted to be able to open up their offense a little bit, and I think obviously they were able to do that some against the Giants. They probably shut things down towards the end because they were up by a ton. What do you see from this Falcons offense, and what do you expect in Penix week 2?
This is a fun and kind of a dangerous group. I mean, the playmakers that they talk about are, storied at this point. You got, Bijan Robinson, you got Drake London, Ray McLeod is an explosive kind of slot player. Darnell Mooney's kind of seeing a career resurgence here. And it's an impressive group of playmakers. And you couple that with an offensive line that maybe doesn't get the pub that the Detroit's or the Philly does, but a very, very good group in the front, in terms of how they run outside zone specifically. And one of the things you talked about there is this team is they've mastered outside zone. When you want to see what does outside zone look like in the NFL now, you watch the Atlanta Falcons. And so one of the things that makes outside zone so effective is the ability to run boots and keepers off of that action. And so when Kirk was in the offense, they just couldn't do it. Just wasn't a part of, I think physically, he's obviously still kind of dealing with the Achilles. He just couldn't do it. And obviously you mentioned in the New York game how they used Penix and how they were able to kind of get him on the perimeter, and he'd made great decisions with those. And I wasn't sure how he'd do because he didn't really do a lot of that at UW. But one of the things that sticks out to me after watching the film, and again, it's one game against a team that is maybe the worst team in the NFL, is how much more effective the offense was with him, right? How much more grass the defense now has to defend, right? Because not only can he do the boots and the keepers and the kind of waggle play action, shots down the field, but he has a live arm, a big arm, in kind of countering what Kirk has been. Kirk has been a guy who throws with great anticipation, understanding that he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. Penix is kind of the antithesis of that. He can touch anywhere. He can take on the right hash, throwing a comeback to the left and get that thing on a frozen rope. And it's just impressive. And so I think that's the thing about him that's probably the most scary, is that all of a sudden now the field feels really big. And that's the thing you don't want to be dealing with as a defensive coordinator. You want that field to feel nice and small and compact. And that's kind of what Kirk was giving you. But now you've got the keepers, the boots, like we just talked about, which again, that affects how I rush, that affects how I fit runs. And then also his ability to kind of touch deeper down the field on these shot plays with explosive playmakers. And you can tell he's still working on his chemistry with Drake London, but if that gets worked out, Drake London, I think I've talked to you about this, I think is on the precipice of becoming a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. He is very dynamic. He can play in the slot. He can play out wide. He's got great short area quickness. He's hyper competitive at the catch point. He's an impressive dude to watch. And so if they kind of get that figured out where, hey, I can throw you a back shoulder whenever I want. I think he missed 2 to him in the game. But if they get that kind of back shoulder ability, he's a guy that, it's a 50-50 jump ball. Drake London, no, he's more than that. And so that's the thing about this game that all of a sudden feels a little bit sketchy to me. It's now all of a sudden you have way more grass to defend. You have way more elements of the quarterback to defend. And also he's a 4-5 guy and he scrambled a little bit in this game, which is something he didn't do a lot in college. That's an other element of his game that you need to be aware of. So I'm not saying he's, the next, he's, he's not
the
rookie, right? He's not that guy, but he makes this offense significantly more potent and way more dangerous. And and it'll be really interesting to see what Joe Wood Jr. does, because to me, it's like, you talk about what he's doing for him and kind of how he's expanded the field. Like, their rushing efficiency is crazy. Watching Bijan run outside zone is amazing. And then you pair that with Tyler Algier, who's like the hammer, like they just are really good. And so for a team in Washington that, struggled stopping the run, obviously they did a great job last week. How do you kind of deal with this offense with a lot of playmakers?
Yeah, couple of things to touch on there. On Penix's mobility, listening back to the TV broadcast, I was watching the condensed game back from last week, and Kevin Kugler and Daryl Johnston, who had the game for Fox, were saying that, hey, the Atlanta coaching staff told us, don't be surprised if Penix takes off. Like, he wasn't known as a mobile guy. He didn't really do it at UW, but I think it's because he was told, like, don't run at Washington. And now it's like, hey, like, you're free. Go. Mm-hmm. And even though he's had the knee surgeries and whatever else, like, he has that club in his bag. He's not super dynamic as a runner by any stretch, but if you give him green grass and just let him run straight, like, he can take it and slide and extend drives. And yeah, he's just straight up 4.5. Like, you can move. As far as London goes, God, watching him is fun. He's so quarterback friendly too. The first catch of the game he has last week runs just like your stereotypical square in, but he comes back with it and like just make sure that he gives Penix a good clean target. And as a big bodied guy, super competitive. That's one where we don't know, as we're recording this on Thursday morning, what Marshawn Lattimore's injury status is, but right. I would imagine if Lattimore is playing that he is shadowing London the entire game. And then you trust Sainer still on Darnell Mooney, and you go from there. But it is definitely a huge deal if Marshawn Lattimore is not going to be able to play, obviously, but especially with a guy in Drake London that is that big, that physical, and that competitive, like you said. But as for the running game, which is kind of the center of it all, Logan, you mentioned their mastery of outside zone. How about this from Next Gen Stats? Falcons rushers have been contacted behind the line of scrimmage on just 39.6 of their design rushes outside the tackle this season, the third lowest rate in the NFL. The Falcons have rushed outside on 69.7% of their design runs, the second highest rate in the NFL. So they're running that outside zone. And outside zone is one where you do get a lot of hits behind the line of scrimmage, because if one guy gets up the field, and because it's not like a straight ahead run where you're to the line of scrimmage quickly. Like, there's so much of that run that is spent behind the line of scrimmage, and you're taking that risk, because if that cutback hits, you're talking about a big gain. And so there is a high risk there. And so that number being that low I think, kind of shows, one, the ability of the offensive line to block it up. And two, there are times where Bijan perhaps makes a guy completely whiff and there is no contact behind the line of scrimmage, even though there was a penetrating defender, because Bijan is that elusive.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a silky smoothness to his running style. And I'm kind of surprised, I guess, that he hasn't had more explosive runs this year, because he is so effective at making people miss in the hole and, making people miss behind line of scrimmage. Like, I don't want to say he's the best back in the NFL, because you got Saquon, you got Derrick Henry, but to me, of the people that I've watched this year, he feels like the third best guy. And he's running behind a really solid group. Obviously, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, Drew Dahlman's having a great year. Jake Matthews is still playing at a high level. Like, that's a good, consistent group. They're not the most physical, mauling. It's very different than Philadelphia, for example, the team we just played, in terms of how they get to their runs and what they do. But they do kind of a wide. They kind of are like, we are an outside zone team, and we're going to run outside zone 12 different ways, and we have a back who can elevate. And then the other thing is, like, if it's a little bit dicey, we can't, we're having a hard time. We've got Tyler Algier, who's also playing at a higher level. Like, in terms of back tandem, to me, they're kind of in the same pantheon as like the Detroit guys, and they don't get as much pub because they play in Atlanta, but it's a good group. So to me, like, the number one thing to be worried about in this game, we talked a lot about Michael Penix, we talked about Drake London. It's like, you got to slow them down in terms of efficiency, right? In terms of how efficient they are running the football. And this is going to be a different test than what we've seen the past couple of weeks, because there's a schematic kind of nuance to what they do. And then obviously, which because of all the motions and the shifts and the pre-snap stuff they do. Think like kind of pseudo Tampa Bay-ish with some of the stuff that they do, right? Like where it's like, we're going to jet motion, we're going to shift and hit you back with this. And it's like a little bit like, we're going to test your rules, going to test your fits. And you can't play super heavy boxes to him, I don't think, because of Penix at the quarterback spot. So it's going to be a really interesting day in terms of presenting a matchup or finding a way to slow them down running the football, I think. So I really don't envy Joe Witt Jr. this week. If Penix can produce the same way he did last week. And again, like he was super efficient. I think his completion percentage was very high. He had 4 drops. His interception, the receiver basically handed the guy the ball. Like
he hit Kyle Pitts in the hands. Rookie mistake.
Yeah. And so, if Penix can play with that level of efficiency and they can run the ball the way they have been running it, this is going to be a tough defensive kind of, what do you take away? What's more important? And I would probably lean towards taking away the running game and just say, hey, Penix, try to beat us from the pocket.
Yeah, I would 100% do that. I would play with a lot of single safety, just chin down in the box. Quan, you're responsible for center field. Marshawn, if you're playing, we're trusting you on London, and let's see what's going on from there. The other big thing you mentioned, is Bijan the best back in the league? Like, probably not. Like, it feels wrong to put him over Saquon and Derrick Henry, but he does statistically have the most missed tackles in the league.
He's exceptional, man. He's exceptional.
The first commander he makes miss on Sunday, I'm going to assume that there's going to be at least one, will be his 100th forced missed tackle of the season. That said, yeah. Wow. So he's got 99 coming into this game, which is the most. Here, hold on. Let me go back to the stat. 99 missed tackles this season, most in the NFL, and tied for 4th most by any player through the first 16 weeks of a season since 2018. So we're talking about a premier player playing at a very high level. However, the Commanders have recorded the 5th lowest missed tackle rate on run plays this season. On all plays, the Commanders have the 3rd lowest missed tackle rate. So the Commanders, after like week 1, week 2, where they missed a bunch of tackles, have really cleaned that up. And that has been kind of a point of pride this season, that they do not miss a ton of tackles. And I feel like sometimes even when they do, like they rally pretty immediately. So that's going to be really important this weekend. But I think that the offensive line in general, like that is the key, not only in the run game, but Penix last week was pressured quite a bit, but he got the ball out so fast it didn't matter. I think it was 2.47 seconds to throw. So you're talking like light. That's like Tua levels of getting the ball out. And so can the Commanders actually get home? Can the Commanders, one, be stickier on the back end than the Giants were and force Penix to hold the football? And 2, can they get home in a way that the Giants had no shot at last week? And I think part of this is their pressure packages, where they are really dynamic in what they do with Luvu moving around and with Bobby moving around. And we'll see, if John Allen's back this week, they've used Payne in some funky alignments. Like, do they get John in some of those as well? And I think that's going to be fun to watch, because watching the Giants try to blitz the Falcons was like almost comical at times. How well the Falcons offensive line slid, picked everything up, kept Penix clean, and then he's able to get rid of the ball quickly. And against a much better organized blitzing team, can they repeat that kind of performance? I think that's a huge key for this one for Washington, is the ability to actually get pressure on a rookie in a way that New York did not at all last week.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because like this team, this offensive line specifically, is kind of they're built with a bunch of run blockers. And that's not to say they can't pass protect, but like in my mind, this team is like it's like kind of the problem that like 90s Broncos teams run into. Like, they're really good at running outside zone. They're not great. So like outside zone, play action pass, keeper's boots, right? They're really good at running that stuff. But in like straight drop back situations, they're not like great. Caleb McGarry, I was there when they drafted him. I think he's a good football player. It's been cool to see him kind of save his career and figure it out. But versus speed rushers in drop back situations, not great, right? Jake Matthews, again, is one of the most savvy players you'll ever be around, but doesn't handle power rushers very well. Like, there are some elements to them as a drop back team that if I'm the offensive coordinator, I'm really, really aware of. The thing is, like, they've built this thing so that they don't have to be in those situations that often. But to your point, like, when they are in those situations and you can kind of corral the quarterback, make him hold the football, I do think there are wins there in terms of creating pressures and giving opportunities to kind of switch the game with sacks and turnovers in that regard. So I think that's a great point. And I think it's also reinforced from like a personnel and just like a roster construction kind of position.
Yeah, I would just blitz the hell out of them the entire game. Like, honestly, if I'm Joe Witt, I would just say, we're going to run blitz you. We're going to pass blitz you. Like, every blitz that we got, we're just going to throw it at you and try to mess up. You're so good at blocking outside zone. Well, what happens if there's an extra dude in somewhere random? Like, can you do that? Now, the Commanders have one of the highest explosive run rates against in the league. I think fans probably intuitively feel that, emotionally feel that. So sometimes that can backfire, and against a back like Bijan, that's dangerous. But I do think that just like, hey, we're bringing pressure no matter what, and we're going to trust our back end is probably the way to go in this one. Anything else from either personnel, like what you expect from John Allen or what they do without Lattimore? Or, I mean, we kind of covered some of this. Or anything else that I haven't mentioned that we want to get to from this game before we head on out of here and wait anxiously all day on Sunday for Sunday Night Football?
It's weird. Like this feels like one of the better offenses that we've played this year. Like, I'm just thinking back, like, I like Philly. They've got explosive playmakers, but in terms of like what the offense is, it's very kind of static. Like, this is what we do. New Orleans, obviously with a backup quarterback, not great. Tennessee with, Will Levis, not great. And then this, all of a sudden you get this group coming in off this Giants game. You're like, man, they're really effective running the ball. They've got well-designed pass concepts. They've got a guy, at least in one game, has shown ability to get the ball there. And so I'm kind of curious, honestly, to see how they handle some of the mental elements of this, right? Because it's not going to be Philly where it's like, hey, we're throwing it to A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. Like, we dare you to take them away. And when we're running, we're going to bring in more tight ends. We're going to run the ball. It's not like that. It's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more kind of tendency breaking. So I'm kind of curious to see how the defense does. I think, they can win physical matchups, but there's like a mental side to this game that's going to be a little bit more challenging. And I really can't wait to watch. And I think the other thing too, which I feel like we've talked about every week, but it's so important to touch on, is that if the offense can support the defense, right? Possess the football, go on long drives, find points, then I think it alleviates some of the pressure that Joe Witt Jr. is experiencing, right? To say, oh, we have to stop the run. We have to blitz. Like, I can be a little bit more conservative, a little bit bend but don't break. And I think they've had a lot of success with that formula over the course of this season. So again, I think it's important just to remind myself that this is a team that needs to play complementary football at all times. And if they can, then some of the risky stuff that you just talked, which I actually think schematically is a good idea, like, let's run blitz, let's get penetrators, let's do some things here, let's blitz on third down. Like, we don't need to be as aggressive because our offense is going to kind of support us and keep us in a positive game flow. So I think that's something really interesting. And it's one of those things where by the end of these shows, I'm always like, I wonder what they're going to do. I wonder if this is how this looks, because you've kind of talked through all of these different things. And that's one thing specifically that I'm really curious about.
For sure. I feel like at the end of every single week, I'm like, oh, the Commanders are going to win this weekend, no matter what, because you talk about all the things they need to do to win, and you start to think about what happens if they happen. But it's a great challenge, and that's what you have to kind of snap out of that and be like, oh, yeah, but it's hard. They actually have to do them. And if they do on Sunday, though, Logan, they are in the playoffs. 11 wins for the first time since the early 90s. Just an exceptional season in year one of the Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, Jaden Daniels era. And we also should know, I mean, frankly, by the time some people are listening to this, we might even have a better idea of the playoff hopes for Washington, because the Seattle-Chicago game is tonight. That I'm anticipating the Bears upsetting the Seahawks, but who knows? But we're getting to the point in the season with only 2 games remaining, and with Washington playing the second to last game of the weekend, we might know if Washington is in before kickoff, which in some ways would be even more fun, because then it becomes like this stress-free coronation of a game as opposed to a like stress fest. Oh my God, they have to win this to get in. But either way, should be a lot of fun at Northwest Stadium on Sunday night. We are going to do live post game. There is no telling how that's going to go. It's going to be way past my bedtime, but we will be live Sunday night / early Monday morning on YouTube at the Team 980, at 1067 The Fan, at Craig Hoffman for the post-game show. And if you are going to bed right after the game, it will be in your podcast feed in the morning. So we'll see you then. to see you at the game. Again, if you're going to the game and it's not raining and you want me to stop by your tailgate, shoot me a message on Instagram at Hoffman.sports. Anthony Haney, my radio producer, and I are going to be perusing the parking lots unless it's raining, and then I'll be inside. That's our show. We'll see you on Sunday night. Commanders, Falcons. Can't wait. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.